So I'll be speaking today about 5 meditation misunderstandings and how to avoid them. And I'd like to bookend our session with a practice at the end as well. So you might, as we're going through these misunderstandings and how to avoid them, you might recognize that even in the 2 minutes that we were practicing just now, that perhaps you had some of these misunderstandings at play that were happening in the background and you may not have recognized them. Okay. In fact, I will tell you that I had a lot of thoughts coming in today, like a lot of thoughts coming in throughout the day. And so we're not going to stop at just 5. Okay, I think I've written down like 14 different ones. So I've added to the misunderstandings. So there's lots of different misunderstandings that can take place when we begin our practice, and then even as we continue in our practice. And one of the things that this may be helpful with is to alleviate the wasting of time. You know, my teacher's teacher says that he practiced incorrectly for 22 years. And he's an incredibly accomplished and genius level individual. And isn't in realms of suffering now. But imagine spending 22 years of your life when you're already a good and strong practitioner, and looking back and thinking, oh wow, I wasted 22 years of that time practicing incorrectly. Okay, so hopefully some of the things that come up today will help us to avoid wasting our time doing things that we aren't able to see and aren't able to avoid. Okay, we can probably avoid a lot of wasting time this way. So I also want to mention that a lot of these misunderstandings are not done intentionally. If we knew that they were misunderstandings, we wouldn't practice the way that we might be. And a lot of them are rooted in sort of a deep subconscious or unconscious beliefs or misunderstandings that maybe even have come through our past lives, things that maybe we don't even recognize are influencing us. Sometimes they may come from assumptions of what we've heard in passing or in ways that we have witnessed other people practicing. So this is, some of these things are actually things that I experienced myself throughout, my years as a practitioner, and I started quite young. In one of those experiences, as a child, I would be taken to sit and meditate for an hour, and, the lights off between 4 and 5 a.m. in a meditation hall where it was mostly adults, and I was like pretty much the only child. And, I would watch other people because that's what you do when you're a kid and you aren't given any instructions. You look to the adults, and I thought that they were practicing correctly. And guaranteed a lot of them weren't. Okay, so, I could also say that I wasted time practicing incorrectly myself. So if any of these things ring a bell with you or seem familiar to you, there's no shame in it and there's no blame in it. It's misunderstanding that is happening because we intend to practice correctly, but we may not know, we may not have been taught, or we may be reverting back to something that we've believed, and that's a very deep-seated sort of belief that's sitting there in the background that's unexamined, that we don't recognize as operating. So I'll start with maybe an easy one, and the first one I'll start with that I've noted down is this feeling or this idea that we need stillness in our practice. Okay. How many of us started, when we first started practicing meditation or mindfulness, we thought we had to sit still or make the mind still? Okay, so pretty much everybody had this understanding when you began, right? And a lot of this comes from the pictures that we have in our mind of what it looks like when you sit and meditate. You sit with your legs crossed, your hands are like this in Chin Mudra or another kind of hand position, your eyes are closed, and you're sitting very still. And you're calming your body, you're calming the mind, right? And so we believe somewhere deep down inside, we might even still revert back to this way of practicing where it feels like we have to be good. And good equals sitting still. This also comes from growing up in that kind of environment where as children we were taught to sit still, to be quiet. Okay, a lot of us grew up in that era where it wasn't okay to, just be natural. So, we may believe that the body needs to be motionless and the mind has to be thoughtless. And those things are not necessary for correct practice. Okay. Myself, as I mentioned earlier, as a child, I saw a lot of people sitting still with their eyes closed. And I thought, oh, this is the epitome of successful practice. They must all be seeing the light, or they must all be, advanced practitioners. And, they were the same people later on that I saw mucking up in their lives, going through all sorts of, difficulties, getting tripped up here and there. So, I was wrong. I was very wrong about that. But in the background, this is stuff that we sometimes absorb and take in. And we revert back to this idea every once in a while. Even now, earlier when I said, let's meditate for a couple of minutes, there may have been some of us who felt like, okay, now I have to sit a certain way. Or we might have improved our posture a little bit. Or we might have gone in to close our eyes to kind of shut out the outside world, right? And I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but if you came into something that felt unnatural or different or more still than usual, then you might recognize that there's this subconscious idea that there's that stillness is preferable over movement of any kind. Okay, so again, it's okay. And how to avoid this is when we're practicing, notice if there's something that feels like it's unnatural, that we're holding or forcing, or that we're trying to shut out the outside world. Okay, if we're trying to come into a quiet interior space that is precious and that's not what's going on in the outside world. I will also differentiate. In mindfulness practice, it's not important to have that kind of stillness or quiet, but if we are practicing certain types of meditation or samatha meditation, we might want to have a greater amount of concentration or ability to be with our object. And so in that case, we may be wanting to draw our attention back to an object and create that sense of focus. But the stillness isn't required. Okay, so this is the first and probably the most challenging for a lot of people when they first begin their practice. The second misunderstanding, number 2, is, and I was guilty of this for a long time, is not to, I call it perching. Don't perch your mind somewhere, okay? Jen's smiling. Does anyone else know what I'm talking about when I say that? Okay, Steve knows what I'm talking about. So I'll describe it, and maybe this might be a little bit familiar to you. So we know that the practice of mindfulness is, having the wherewithal, having the mindfulness that sees this body and this mind as they are, with a stable and neutral observation. Okay, that's the practice in a nutshell. So seeing this body and this mind impartially. Okay, seeing it, often you'll hear our teachers will say, practice as though you're observing somebody else's body, somebody else's mind, right? And so what I did for a long time, and wasted a lot of time doing this, was I would put my mind back here somewhere. And it was like I was watching Salima. I'd be, driving to work, watching Salima. I'd be going on my lunch break, watching Salima. I would, be doing the dishes back here, watching from over here. And it wasn't until probably 2013, I just started practicing, so it wasn't that long that I'd wasted time doing this, but I used to do it a lot. And one of the teachers from Thailand was in Florida. Okay, so my teacher's teacher was touring around the United States, and there was one point where they were in Florida and another teacher was there, and I had a little one-on-one with that teacher, and she looked at me and she said, "You're artificially positioning your mind somewhere to watch from that place." And I didn't think that was a bad thing. That was a misunderstanding that I had. And so if we think that we need to kind of place our mind back here somewhere to be able to watch ourselves, this is already starting from an unnatural place of observation. So we're not going to be seeing clearly or seeing the truth. Okay, so instead, what we do is we just let ourselves be as we are, okay? And then we just notice afterwards what happened, okay? The feeling that we have to, we have to put ourselves somewhere to observe from, it comes from wanting to practice well and to be good. It comes from these types of things. I want to get it right. I want to practice well. And so we are like a taskmaster, and we give the mind a place to go and look from, right? And again, this creates an artificial observation. We're not observing naturally. And we might be over-focusing if we do that too. Okay, so instead, see if we can relax out of it and just let yourself be as you are, and allow the experience to be observed after whatever the experience is that came up. So just now I moved my hand like this, right? And a moment later I recognized that the hand moved, okay? But I didn't look from back here and go, oh, let's look at Salima now. How's she doing? What's she doing? Okay. Does that make sense? A couple of nods. Okay, so some of you might have been practicing in this way for a little while, or you might even recognize that you were doing it and then sometimes even revert back to it sometimes. Okay, so the awareness here really is key for a lot of this stuff. Okay, third one, number 3. We believe that we're bad and that meditation makes us better. Okay, so there's some kind of personal improvement that needs to happen, and meditation is like the way that we're going to do it. So the idea that, we're practicing because we're bad, or we have to meditate to improve ourselves, we're already not seeing ourselves clearly. We're actually looking at ourselves with some kind of a negative bias already. Okay, it sounds kind of like some religions will tell us, like, you have to repent and you're bad, and you're gonna go to a bad place unless you do these and these things. And so some of this may even come from culturally, come from some kind of an understanding that kind of is floating around out there, or other kinds of teachings that are out there. And it's important, in terms of avoiding this, it's important for us to recognize what are we coming into the practice with? Okay, how are we arriving into the practice? Are we arriving with this idea that I need to get somewhere? I need, this is a goal, or, I need to try and improve. I'm trying to improve myself. Though there's already something operating in the background, and that is worth observing. That's worth seeing in and of itself. And the more that we're able to see that, then that can fall away after a while, and we can practice much more naturally, much more easily, with a much more kind sort of mind towards ourselves. When we were recently in Thailand, we were on this short retreat. It was maybe 4 days, but it was intensive. It was a very intensive retreat, but it was only 4 days. And over those 4 days, the teachers and there was one main teacher and like a number of volunteers, like probably 12, 15 volunteers. Their whole job was to make us comfortable. And there were moments where I was like, do I deserve all of these snacks? Do I deserve a nap at lunchtime? Do I deserve all of these good things that they're taking such incredibly good care of us? And yeah, we do deserve those good things. And so it came to my attention, somewhere in the back of my mind, it came to my attention that I believed, and maybe even sneakily, sometimes this belief still comes in, that I'm not as good as I think I should be, and I need to practice to be better. The practice is the thing that's going to make me a better person, or more worthy, or whatever it is. Okay, and so this might be, for some of us, this might be a belief that we're not good enough, and that the meditation is there to make us better. Okay, can we just see if we can maybe get rid of that, and we're already good, right? I like to use the analogy of, like, there's a feeling that I can recall, and the feeling is sitting cross-legged in kindergarten on the carpet, there's a carpet. There's always a carpet in kindergarten, okay? And sitting cross-legged, and we'd all sit in a circle, and everybody just sang or, got the story read to them, and, everybody belonged. And it just felt very easy and very natural. And so if we can have that kind of feeling of accepting ourselves a little bit more than that feeling of I'm bad and I need to practice or meditate to get somewhere, can start to melt away. Okay, we might need to do it multiple times, many, many times for some of us, including myself. We might need to do it many, many times to believe it. But it's important for us not to start off with an idea or a judgment about ourselves right out of the gate. Okay. Also, don't just practice when we're feeling down. Okay, so some people think that meditation is like a medication, right? And, I'm not feeling good, I need to sit and meditate so that I can feel better, right? You can do a multitude of different things to make yourself feel better, but don't only meditate when times are tough. I see this in my healing practice as well. I'll get, people get in touch with me when, especially students, when they haven't been practicing for a while and life gets really bad, or their husband, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend is no longer in the picture, and then they come back to their spiritual practice, right? And so it's important for us to recognize that it is a practice, and so it's something that we should be doing continuously. Sometimes it will be great, sometimes it won't be great, but we just continue with the practice. All right, number 4. Okay, number 4, we think we need 60 minutes or 90 minutes or 120 minutes a day to practice. And this isn't true. When we're starting off especially, it's important to make the commitment of time to make it doable. Okay, so like way back in time when my teacher had his courses, he would say, practice for 15 minutes a day, just 15 minutes a day, right? And now that things have gotten really busy and we're attached to computers and watches and smart glasses and all sorts of stuff, we're kind of cyborgs at this point. It's kind of hard to extricate ourselves from our phones even, right? So because we've got so much of the world pulling at us so hard for our attention, it is more important to set aside a little bit more time. And so I would say start with 20. If you can start with 20, great. But if you can't, if you're just starting out, start with 5. And then every couple of days, increase it. Make it 7, make it 10, make it 15. Go up to 20 if you can. For those of us who are practitioners and have been practitioners for a long time and teachers for a while, an hour is a good amount of time. It's a decent amount of time. More than an hour might even be better for us. And the time that we put into our practice can be a combination of some meditation and some formal mindfulness practice. Okay, so it doesn't all have to be exactly the same practice, but it could be a little bit of samatha or meditation as we know it, meditation, okay, where we have an object and we're observing the mind as we're observing that object, but we're observing the object. And then where we let the mind be more free, and we might be doing a walking, or we might be doing a sitting practice, but we have the object there in the background and let the mind be very, very free, okay? And it doesn't have to be consecutive, right? So break it up in chunks, make it manageable. If it has to be, a certain amount of time in the morning and a certain amount of time in the afternoon or the evening, then you can break it up. It doesn't all have to be all at the same time. If you want to retreat, push yourself a little bit. Okay, that's when that's the time where you can really sit down and make that practice work for you even more. And I do recommend private retreats and personal retreats. I have a blog post on my website. If anyone wants it, I'll send you the link to it. But there's a blog post on how to do your own private retreat at home, which I was started doing during COVID. Okay, highly recommend. Try and tell everyone at home to leave you alone for a day and just focus on your practice. Okay, it was easier during COVID than it is now, but highly recommend. And if you can do it, then great. And I know Jess is doing one, I think it's the 20th of June, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so Jen, thank you for your nodding. Yeah, he's doing it on the 20th of June, and if you want to join, get in touch with him. I will also mention that walking meditation generally takes a little bit longer to get into. And so the recommended period of practice all in one shot would be, the minimum time would be about 30 minutes. Okay, and it just because it is much more movement, the mind is moving a lot more, it might take a little while to really get into it and to let your mind be comfortable doing it. Many people do not like walking meditation when they first start, or walking practice, and then after a while, once one gets used to it, it becomes the preferred, for a lot of people, the preferred method of practice. And a lot of the practitioners and those who are very, very skilled in the practice in Thailand will do more walking practice, or sometimes even exclusively walking practice, versus sitting practice. Okay, so again, it doesn't have to be still. Coming back to number one, we don't need to have that stillness. Okay. The other thing I will say, one other way to avoid the feeling of like, oh, it feels like I can't do an hour, it's too hard, or I can't do 30 minutes, it's too hard, is to know that there will be waves of having heightened energy and less energy in your practice during that period of time that we're practicing. So if we decide to practice for 30 minutes, and let's say 5 minutes in it's good, 10 minutes in our energy starts to wane a little bit, our mind gets really busy and we're not able to effectively observe the mind, and then 15 minutes in, it starts to kind of calm down again, and then 20 minutes in it starts to improve and you start to feel like you're on a bit of a roll with your practice. There will be those periods of ups and downs throughout those 30 minutes. Often you might come to the end of your practice and feel like, oh, I could go for longer. Okay, so don't just let the bell go off and be like, okay, I'm done. If you don't have somewhere to go, then you can practice for longer. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay. All right. Let's do number 5, and that is that I'm a bad meditator. Okay, that kind of goes along with what I was just talking about before. If we're not seeing improvements, then we give up. I can't tell you how many people I talk to are like, I'm a bad meditator, I can't meditate. I've tried and I can't do it. And they just decide that, it's off the table for them. And I ask them, so what's the problem? What happens when you try and meditate? Oh, my mind is just all over the place. I notice it going here, it's going there, then 1 minute it's going. I'm like, actually, you're a good practitioner because you're able to see that your mind is moving. You're able to see the mind is busy or thinking or feeling or whatever it's doing. So the idea that, again, this comes from this misunderstanding that we need to focus and only be with our object, be with the breath or be with the mantra or one of those types of things. And this is a misunderstanding of what mindfulness practice is about. If we have an object like the breath or a mantra and the mind enjoys being with it and we're with the object for a while and the mind doesn't want to waver, that's a samatha practice and it's a meditation. Okay, it is a meditation. But if the mind is with it sometimes and then we see the mind leaving it and then it's back with it again and then it's leaving it and then it's back again, then that can be our mindfulness practice where we're able to see the mind and what the mind is doing. So the point of the practice then isn't to be fixated on the object, but rather to notice every time the mind leaves the object and does what it's naturally going to be doing. Okay, so this misconception is it's hard to get through because, again, a lot of the time we have this idea of what meditation is and what mindfulness practice is. We get this image in our mind, or we've had lifetimes of practicing in a certain way and holding really tightly to an object. And this old way of practicing is still somehow knocking around inside us, and it'll creep up on us every once in a while. Okay. All right, number 6. Is not having a teacher and a community. So it is true that some people will adopt a practice that they've heard about and then they'll just strike out on their own. Okay, some people will listen to guided meditations and that's all they do. They're just listening to the guided meditation, and then when the guided meditation, maybe they don't have maybe the teacher took the recording away, or they don't have their phone one day, then all of a sudden, oh no, I can't practice because I can't listen to my favorite, teacher's guided meditation. And so these types of things, like even a guided meditation, can have short-term benefits. It can benefit you short term, but it's not going to provide the opportunity to wake up and have much more of that longer term benefit to us. Okay, so it is important for us to have a teacher, but not to rely on that teacher for those types of guided meditations or that kind of thing. Even with like things like, I wrote down here scriptures, like some people will just read scriptures, like even people will pull out like the Buddhist scriptures and they'll just focus on reading them. And there's a few reasons why this can be problematic. Sometimes, well, they're translated from a different language. So right away there could be some misinterpretation, right? They can be very hard to lend easily to a modern context, okay, to our modern mind. So we might read something and we might misinterpret it, or it might not be as applicable to us in our modern age as it was back when it was actually written. Also, we might read certain scriptures and then not read other ones that might be more important than what we are reading. So for this, I would say, you're already avoiding that by being here with the Mindfulness Society. You have a teacher, you have a community, you're listening to the correct teachings. You might recognize some ways in which your practice is kind of veered off track, and you can then bring yourself back on track that way. And there are lots of teachers who are on your screen already, who are here with us here today. And if you're looking for a teacher, feel free to put a note in the chat, and one of the teachers will reach out to you, and you can learn with them. Okay. Number 7, meditation and mindfulness is not a one-size-fits-all kind of activity. Okay. So not all meditation and mindfulness practices are effective for everybody equally. You could be practicing with the breath, or have a mantra, or you could be contemplating the skin or the bones or the teeth or something like that. And we can't say that everybody is going to practice equally well with the same objects. So it's important for us to know our temperament and to know what kind of mind we have. And it's important to also know that the practice is adjustable. The practice has to be the type of practice that is going to show results to us as an individual versus, now everybody focus on the breath, and that's going to be great for everyone. Okay, so in a lot of meditation schools, you'll find that that's the way that the teacher will teach. The teacher will teach everyone to practice with the same object and expect everyone to have the same types of results. And this could be a big waste of time for a lot of people. Okay, so earlier I mentioned, breath, walking meditation, a mantra. You will probably, a lot of you that I see on my screen, I already see that, you've been practicing for a while, and you already have your object. You already have an object that you like to rest with, and continue on with your object. Okay, know that it doesn't have to be, I know Jess tells this story, and I think Jess's teacher tells this story about how Jess's teacher's teacher had a student who was a monk, and this monk was told to contemplate one strand of hair, right? And as he tells the story, this monk was disappointed. Like, he's like, why didn't I get something more challenging or more interesting to pay attention to? Why wasn't it a really beautiful mantra, for example? And he avoided doing the practice that he was told would be better for him until the day that he went back to see his teacher. And on the way there, he pulled up a strand of hair from somewhere. I guess he didn't have his own hair because he was a monk, but he pulled up a strand of hair and contemplated. I think it was like that day or on the way to see his teacher, and he enlightened, like, just from that one practice. Okay. Now, I'm not going to say that you're going to have, like, on your way to go to a class or whatever you're going to suddenly enlighten, but it is important for us to know that we can make a lot more progress with the type of practice that we feel works better for us. Okay, and in some cases we need a teacher to help us to adjust here and there a little bit. okay, to point out where we might be stuck a little bit and to give us a little bit of encouragement. And we get a lot of encouragement when we go to Thailand. A lot of us who've been to Thailand and see the teachers there, they'll point right at us and they'll, aren't you controlling, and they'll tell us what we're doing wrong. And that is why a teacher is so powerful and so important. Okay. So where are we? Number 8? Number 8. This is an interesting one. And that is that sometimes we believe, so we're told that, as you practice mindfulness, you'll see things come up and fall away. So an emotion, a big anger or a big sadness or a big guilt or a big greed or something like that will come up, and, you'll see it come up and you'll see it fall away, disappear right in front of your eyes. Okay. And I know several of us have had these experiences where you see a big emotion and all of a sudden it just completely vanishes, like disappears. We don't try and figure it out or adjust ourselves or try and say the right thing. The right thing happens by itself. And so what the misunderstanding is that mindfulness means that we're not going to engage in life, that we become this sort of passive person that doesn't engage in life, right? So let's say, for example, my nephew falls down and scrapes his knee, right? And, I was mindful and I saw that I was upset because he scraped his knee. So I would just, passively accept it and let him, be on the ground with his knee bleeding, right? And so this can be a big misunderstanding, that we think we just become this person that doesn't engage in life. When in fact, as I mentioned a few moments ago, it actually allows us to engage in a more appropriate way. So what happens is the big feeling that we experience, it might be fear. In this case, if I saw my nephew fall, a fear would come up. But in that moment, if there was mindfulness and if there was samadhi, then that fear could fall away. And in that moment, there would be just this moment of just seeing what happened. Okay, that fear would be gone. The effects of that fear would be gone. And in that next moment, whatever comes up is coming up without the filter of the fear in the way. So the fear goes away. And so, I'm going to go and help my nephew get up and make sure that, we clean up his wound and make sure he's okay, right? So you can still absolutely get involved and, engage in life and do all of the things that need to happen. But perhaps I wouldn't go to him with oh my God, you're going to die. I wouldn't approach him in that way in that moment, because the fear would have vanished. It would have dropped away already. So it's just, let me help you. Okay. Does that make sense, what I just said? Okay. So what would it be like for us to have a day where we had seen the arising and falling of something that maybe was a big deal, and then whatever the next thing we said was, or the next thing we did was absolutely appropriate and without a charge of the emotion in the way, right? How would that free us? That is so incredibly freeing for us. Okay, so in this way, the misunderstanding that, we're practicing to become zombies. No, we're not practicing to become zombies. We're still human beings. Okay, and that's how the practice goes. So with a lot of these, what's important is, to start off our practice to see our motivations, our underlying beliefs about the practice and during the practice. And if we are practicing mindfulness, then we're training ourselves to do just that, is to be present and know what's happening during the practice and as we begin our practice. I wrote down a whole bunch of extra ones today. Those were 8 of them. So it's I'm sorry everyone, it's not going to be 5, it's going to be 8. And then I ended up with 14. So do you guys want me to continue and do the rest of the rest of the ones? Okay, so I have enough people nodding, and I would absolutely like to bookend my talk today with some more practice. Okay, so I'm going to go through these last 6 of these, and then I'm going to give us a little bit of time to practice. So I'll maybe talk a little bit quickly, and I'll try not to get too in-depth with anything. So the 9th one is that we have to empty our mind to any degree, or the opposite of this, the opposite way of saying it, but the same sort of thing, is that I'm too distracted. I'm too distracted. right? So we try and clear things out of our mind. And so if we do that, it's like going to see a movie where nothing happens. Okay, so what's the point of going to see a movie when nothing happens, when there's nothing happening? Okay, so what we are doing in this practice, in mindfulness practice, is we're observing this body and the mind. And if we're holding it still, for example, or trying to empty the mind, then there's nothing to observe. And so that's unnatural. We're not actually benefiting from the practice, and we'd be wasting our time. So what we do in that case, and one of the ways to avoid it, is to adjust the object or to adjust the practice to make it a little bit more up to the same speed as what's going on with our mind. So for example, if I had a very, very, very busy day, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, time to meditate, and I went to sit down and I'm going to do a breathing practice. I'm watching the breath and I'm trying to empty the mind, and then all of a sudden, or I notice when I'm watching the breath that the mind is still busy, chaotic inside, and you know, there's so much going on. That practice isn't going to work for me, and I'm going to think I'm a bad meditator. I'm going to want to give up, you know, all the things I mentioned earlier. What we do in that case is we make that practice move a little bit more quickly, or approach the mind that's there right at that time. So instead of just breathing, which is the most still form of practice, instead of just breathing, I might add in counting the breath, or I might have a mantra and use the mantra with the breath and make that breath meditation a little bit more interesting. So the mind can still be a little bit busy, but it's busy being interested in the mantra or interested in the counting. Okay, so I give that practice a little bit more interest in that way. Okay, and generally if we're busy and we find that we have a very busy life, the recommendation often is to incorporate some walking practice. So walking is also, you know, it has a bit of a movement to it. So there's more interest, there's more to observe. Okay, so let's not say we're too distracted, because whenever we notice the mind going out and leaving the object is that golden moment where we're able to wake up and see what the mind did. Okay. Number 10, we need the space around us to be calm in order to practice. And I say this and I'm laughing because in my house, everyone talks really loud because there's hearing loss going on in my house. So there's just, you know, there's like almost like you're yelling across a cavern to yell at somebody at a distance, is what's going on in my house. So I'm laughing because sometimes I'm sitting and practicing and I'm hearing like voices. Just I can't get away from it, and it does feel disruptive. Okay, I'm going to be honest. It feels very disruptive. If I'm able to notice the disliking in that moment, you know, I feel like my meditation has been, you know, it's not been going well because my attention's out and hearing people yelling at each other and talking really loudly and all of that sort of thing. If I'm able to notice the discomfort, then the practice is actually working way better for me than if I sat in a white room with, you know, soundproofing all around. Okay, because that's not natural. That's not putting myself in a natural environment. In Thailand, we were doing walking meditation, and there were maybe like 8 or 10 of us at a time walking in a big hall, a big open outdoor hall, on this retreat. And we were walking just like 3 or 4 feet away from each other. You know, there's just, you know, all these people just walking back and forth. And then when we were inside, we had, the teacher was like on a microphone and pointing at us and, Salima, you're controlling, so-and-so, you're controlling. Do you notice your left side is more controlled than the right side? You know, and so it's impossible not to have your mind go out and like, oh, that person's controlling. You know, it's impossible not to have that happen. And yet that's the ideal condition, because that's approaching what everyday life actually feels like. Okay, so if you feel like you're practicing, I once had a student who, not long ago actually, she said, you know, when I'm practicing, my husband's making his coffee in the morning in the other room and he's just making so much noise and I can't settle down. And I'm like, Why do you want to settle down? What in you needs to settle down, right? So do you notice you're not settled? Okay, so there's a golden opportunity to see what happens when we're not controlling. We're not controlling the outside world, because we're never going to be able to control the outside world. No matter how much we want it to be, how we want it to be, it's never going to be what we want it to be. Okay. All right, there's a few more. The practice isn't religious. Okay, so we're not praying to anyone. We're not having to believe in any particular gods or anybody out there. This practice really comes down to us. It really relies on us and no one else. It relies on our ability to show up for ourselves, our ability to be present, our ability to take it easy, to be kind towards ourselves. If there are gods and angels around, then great, but they're not practicing. It's us who is practicing. Okay, so we don't need to subscribe to a religion. It's true that there's a lot of Buddhist leanings in our teachings, especially because it's the Mindfulness Society, which comes from the teachings of the Buddha. If there was no Buddha, there would not be a word called mindfulness today. But there is no requirement to believe in the Buddha as a god, because he wasn't, and there is no requirement to pray. Okay, so there may be chanting, and even the chanting is often, a lot of the chants are, to bring in wholesomeness and to bring in more clarity in our mind. Okay, not because we're asking for help or anything like that. All right, let's see. Meditation is for relaxation. So some forms of meditation can help us relax. So a samatha, okay? Samatha practice is having an object and, being with that object and enjoying being with that object. It could be the breath or a mantra, or it could be a movement, but that's not the fullest extent of the practice. If we're practicing mindfulness, we have the opportunity to release suffering completely release suffering fully and completely. So we don't know how far we can get. And this goes to the next one, which is that there's the misunderstanding that enlightenment is far away, that it couldn't happen in this lifetime. Okay, I was just talking to a friend who's here tonight, who, she heard a teacher saying, not one of our teachers, but a monk somewhere was saying, we're not practicing to enlighten in this lifetime. We're not practicing for real results in this lifetime. And if we are believing that, then it can set us back in our practice. Okay, it can make us lazy in our practice. It can put in all sorts of systems in the background that are going to prevent us from practicing well. And so we don't know how close we are to freedom from suffering. We could be very, 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 very close. Okay, and so we don't know. And so what we can do to avoid this pitfall is practice the way that we brush our teeth. Okay, I like using the teeth brushing, because when we're brushing our teeth, we're not actually trying to get anything out of it. We're not trying to get anywhere. We're just brushing our teeth because it's something we do every day. It's been drilled into us. It's good oral hygiene, and we just do it as a practice. Okay, it takes just a few minutes and we just do it, and when it's done, right? And so if we can just do our practice that way, that we're not setting a goal to reach enlightenment, but we're also not subtly preventing ourselves from getting there either. Okay. And then the last one, 14, is the misunderstanding that we're not suffering. I can't tell you, every once in a while we'll come across someone who's like, I'm fine. There's no problem in my life. Everything's perfect. And, what's going on there is they're just not seeing things. They're not seeing themselves clearly. Okay. And the way to avoid that is to practice, and you will see suffering. Okay, you will see your preferences, you will see your likes and dislikes, and you will see your cravings, and you'll see the anger and the delusions and all those things coming up. We'll see those things if we practice. So I thought I would just check in. Anyone have any other misunderstandings you want to bring to our attention, feel free to put them in the chat if you'd like. But I hope this was a bit of a foray into some of the obvious, maybe some ways that some things you've heard before, but also some subtle ways in which we might be hindering our own progress, and some ways to kind of a little bit of a course correction for us. Okay. All right, I don't see any chat messages here, so I don't think anyone has any contributions in other misunderstandings. So let's do another short practice, okay? This time I'll go for 9 minutes. Okay, let's do 9 minutes of practice. I'll ring the bell. Was it too loud before? Is it okay? I'll ring the bell and I'll ring it again after the 9 minutes are up, okay? So feel free to, if you want, you can bring your hands, palms together up towards your chest. May we all be happy. May we all be peaceful. May we all practice well and diligently. May we be kind towards ourselves and each other. And may all beings everywhere, each and every one, be happy, peaceful, safe, at ease, healthy and well. May all beings everywhere be free from suffering. Namaste. Thank you very much for being here tonight and practicing with me together.